Let me tell you about the day Jake Thompson almost caused an intergalactic incident by getting a paper cut. Well, technically it wasn't a paper cut, but you'll see what I mean. Jake worked maintenance aboard the starship Hypochondriac, which was probably the most ironically named vessel in the Galactic Medical Emergency Response Fleet. The ship housed the galaxy's most paranoid collection of alien doctors, nurses, and medical technicians, all dedicated to keeping various species alive across 17 different star systems. They took their job very seriously. Maybe too seriously. On that particular Tuesday, Jake was elbow-deep in a ventilation shaft on Deck 7, trying to fix a rattling fan that had been driving everyone nuts for 3 weeks. The Zephyrians were especially sensitive to repetitive sounds, and their head nurse, Glim'ara, had been filing noise complaints hourly. Jake figured he'd better fix it before she started molting stress feathers all over the medical bay. "Come on, you piece of junk," Jake muttered, wrestling with a particularly stubborn bolt. The wrench slipped, his knuckle scraped against the metal housing, and a small drop of red liquid appeared on his hand. Now, to Jake, this was about as noteworthy as breathing. He'd gotten worse injuries opening pickle jars. But to the 3 alien crew members who happened to be walking by at that exact moment, it was apparently the apocalypse. Nurse Glim'ara was the first to spot the carnage. Her feathers immediately puffed out to twice their normal size, and she let out a shriek that probably registered on seismic equipment 3 systems away. Medical emergency. The human is leaking. Dr. Wobblethorp, a gelatinous Bloraxian who served as the ship's trauma specialist, immediately began vibrating at frequencies that made the deck plates hum. "Oh no, oh no, oh no. His life essence is escaping. We're losing him." The third witness, Communications Officer Pip'squeek, a tiny squealian who barely reached Jake's kneecap, started running in circles while emitting a high-pitched whine that sounded like a smoke detector having a nervous breakdown. Jake blinked at them, still holding the wrench. Guys? I'm fine. It's just a little cut." But his words were lost in the chaos. Glim'ara had already activated her emergency beacon, bathing the corridor in pulsing red light. "Doctor." "One. Wobblethorp was frantically extending pseudopods to examine Jake from a safe distance, apparently afraid that getting too close might result in cross-contamination with whatever horrible condition was causing the human to leak fluids. "Don't move," Wobblethorp gurgled. "Any sudden movement might accelerate the hemorrhaging." Jake looked down at his knuckle, where exactly 1 drop of blood had formed. Not dripped, just formed. "Hemorrhaging? Are you looking at the same finger I am?" "He's going into shock," Pip'squeek announced, still running in circles. "Look how pale he is. That's his natural color, right? Right? Someone tell me that's his natural color." Jake was beginning to understand why humans weren't exactly lining up to join multi-species crews. "Listen, I just need a Band-Aid and maybe a sandwich. I missed lunch, and I'm getting hangry." The aliens stared at him in horror. Apparently, the fact that he was thinking about food while dying only confirmed their worst fears about the severity of his condition. Glim'ara's feathers were now so puffed she looked like a walking pillow explosion. "He's delirious," she whispered. "The blood loss is affecting his brain function. He thinks he's hungry instead of dying." "That's actually exactly what I think," Jake said, but nobody was listening anymore. The red emergency lights were flashing, alarms were blaring, and he was pretty sure someone had just announced a ship-wide lockdown. All this over a scratch that wouldn't have even qualified for a Hello Kitty Band-Aid. Jake sighed and climbed out of the ventilation shaft. This was going to be a long day. Within minutes, the entire ship had transformed into what Jake could only describe as a floating psychiatric ward. Emergency lights bathed everything in ominous red, klaxons wailed like banshees with anxiety disorders, and crew members were running around with the kind of panic usually reserved for asteroid impacts or surprise tax audits. Captain Vextar, a 7-foot-tall Chromaxian with more battle scars than a Gladiator Academy dropout, burst onto the scene with his usual dramatic flair. His forearms were gesticulating wildly, and his mandibles were clicking in what Jake had learned was either excitement or terror. Given the circumstances, probably terror. Report. Vextar barked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded fleets through 3 galactic wars and one particularly nasty office Christmas party incident. The human has suffered catastrophic fluid loss, Glim'ara reported, her feathers still at maximum puff. We estimate he has minutes, perhaps seconds, before total system failure. Jake held up his hand, where the microscopic cut had already stopped bleeding. I'm literally fine. This is barely even a scratch. He's entered the denial phase, Dr. Wobblethorp diagnosed, his gelatinous form quivering with medical authority. Classic symptom of massive trauma. He can't process the severity of his condition. Captain Vextar's third eye focused on Jake's finger with the intensity of a targeting laser. Dear gods of the void, I can see the wound. It's, he paused, apparently searching for words to describe the horror. It's a microscopic breach in his exterior hull. Hull breach. Pip'squeek shrieked. He's got a hull breach. Jake was beginning to suspect that alien medical training might be slightly different from human medical training. It's not a hull breach. I'm not a spaceship. I'm a maintenance worker with a tiny cut who really wants a turkey sandwich. But Captain Vextar was already shouting orders. Dr. Blim talked to the scene immediately. Seal off this section. And someone get me a complete analysis of human repair protocols. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Blimtalk arrived moments later, looking like a cross between a praying mantis and a very concerned librarian. His compound eyes immediately focused on Jake's finger, and he began making notes on a tablet with movements so frantic he looked like he was conducting an orchestra of anxiety. I need immediate access to the human medical database, Blimtalk announced, and someone contact the Galactic Health Organization. We may need to declare a biohazard situation. Jake watched in fascination as his tiny scratch became the center of what appeared to be a military operation. You know, I've been hurt worse making coffee. Last week I got a paper cut opening sugar packets, and nobody called the Space Marines. He's becoming incoherent, Blimtalk diagnosed. The blood loss is clearly affecting his cognitive functions. He's talking about beverages and small cuts as if they're normal occurrences. That's because they are normal occurrences, Jake said, but he might as well have been talking to the ventilation shaft. Nobody was listening to the actual human in this human medical emergency. Communications Officer Pip'squeek was now at his station, frantically sending messages across the galaxy. Mayday, mayday. This is the starship Hypochondriac. We have a human in critical condition. Repeat, human in critical condition. He's lost at least. How much blood would you say he's lost? Impossible to tell, Glim'ara replied gravely. The loss appears to have stopped, but that might just mean he's running out of blood to lose. Jake stared at them. I have like 5.5 liters of blood. I lost maybe a drop. That's like, I don't know, math isn't my strong suit, but it's really not a lot. He's trying to give us medical statistics, Dr. Wobblethorp marveled. Even in his final moments, he's attempting to help us understand his condition. How noble. How tragic. I'm not in my final moments, Jake protested. I'm in my hungry moments. I just want lunch. But his mention of food only made things worse. The aliens exchanged horrified glances, apparently convinced that Jake's desire for sustenance while dying was either a symptom of severe shock or evidence of legendary human courage in the face of certain death. Jake looked around at the chaos he'd accidentally created and sighed. Maybe he should have just dealt with the rattling fan. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself in the center of what could only be described as an alien medical convention. The ship's main conference room had been converted into a crisis center, complete with holographic displays showing magnified images of his finger from 17 different angles. We need an expert, Captain Vextar announced, his mandibles clicking with determination. Get me Professor Zumblex. Jake perked up. Finally, someone who might know something about humans. The main screen flickered to life, revealing Professor Zumblex in his office at the Galactic University of Xenobiology. Zumblex was a tentacled intellect, which meant he looked like an octopus that had gotten really into academia. His office was lined with books, research papers, and what appeared to be a collection of human movie posters. "Ah, Captain Vextar," Zumblex said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent decades studying things he'd never actually encountered. "I understand you have a human medical emergency." "Critical condition," Dr. Blimtalk interjected. "Massive fluid loss, possible shock, and he keeps talking about food." Professor Zomblex's tentacles writhed with what Jake assumed was academic excitement. "Fascinating. You see, humans are the most remarkable species in the galaxy. They are warriors of unimaginable resilience, capable of surviving injuries that would instantly kill any civilized being." Jake raised his hand. "Actually, I'm just a maintenance guy with a scratch." "Observe his stoicism," Zumblex continued, pointing a tentacle at Jake through the screen. "Even now, facing mortal peril, he maintains the calm demeanor of a true human warrior. I've studied their documentary films extensively. Die Hard, Rambo, The Terminator. Humans routinely survive explosions, gunfire, and falls from great heights with nothing more than determination and occasional one-liners." "Those are movies," Jake said weakly. "They're not documentaries." "He's being modest," Zumblex explained to the rapt audience. "Human culture discourages boasting about their incredible abilities." Notice how he downplays his condition, referring to what is clearly a serious injury as a mere scratch. This is classic human behavior. Jake looked at his finger again, just to make sure he wasn't missing something. "Nope, still barely visible. It really is just a scratch." The fact that he continues to insist on this demonstrates either severe shock or the legendary human ability to function normally even when critically injured, Zumblex continued. "In my research, I found instances of humans continuing to fight while missing entire limbs." "That's probably not accurate," Jake said, but Zumblex was on a roll. "I recommend treating this as a Class 7 medical emergency," the professor announced. "Full surgical intervention may be necessary. And whatever you do, don't let him fall asleep. Humans who lose consciousness during medical trauma often slip into something they call the long sleep." "You mean death?" Dr. Blimtalk asked, his compound eyes wide with horror. "No, I mean sleep," Jake said. "It's this thing we do every night. It's totally normal." But the damage was done. The aliens were now convinced that Jake's casual attitude toward his mortal wound was evidence of either superhuman toughness or complete psychological breakdown. Either way, they weren't about to let him out of their sight. The human's ability to remain conscious and coherent despite massive trauma is truly remarkable, Zumblex mused. "You're witnessing something extraordinary, Captain. This is why humans are considered the most formidable species in the galaxy." Jake slumped in his chair. "I just wanted to fix a fan and eat a sandwich. Now I'm apparently a medical marvel." "His continued focus on sustenance is particularly fascinating," Zumblex noted. "Even in crisis, humans maintain their survival instincts. Food, shelter, reproduction. Basic drives that keep them functional, even when their bodies should be shutting down." "My body is fine," Jake protested. "It's my stomach that's the problem. I'm hungry. The aliens stared at him with a mixture of awe and terror. To them, apparently Jake's ability to think about lunch while dying was the stuff of legend. This was going to be a very long day. The ship's medical bay had been transformed into something resembling a war room, if wars were fought by very confused doctors who'd never seen a human before. Charts covered every available surface, showing everything from basic human anatomy to theoretical diagrams of how Jake's massive trauma might progress. Dr. Blimtalk stood at the center of it all, his compound eyes darting between displays while his assistant scurried around taking notes. "The human's condition remains stable, but we must assume rapid deterioration is imminent." "Based on what?" Jake asked from his position on the examination table, where he'd been gently but firmly placed despite his protests. "I feel fine. Better than fine, actually, except for the part where I'm starving." "Classic symptom of impending shock," Dr. Wobblethorp gurgled knowingly. "The body's final attempt to maintain normal function before complete system failure." A new voice joined the conversation. Dr. Glim'ara, a insectoid chitinous who specialized in emergency medicine, clicked her way over to the group. I've been researching human physiology in the database. Did you know they routinely lose millions of cells every day and consider it normal? Millions? Glim'ara's feathers ruffled. How do they survive? They replace them, Glim'ara explained. It's like they're constantly rebuilding themselves. And their skin? It's designed to shed and regenerate continuously. Jake perked up. Finally, someone who gets it. This is totally normal. Normal for a species of regenerating warriors, Glim'ara corrected. No wonder they're so feared across the galaxy. They're basically living weapon systems that repair themselves. I'm a maintenance worker, Jake said. I fix air conditioners and unclog toilets. I'm not a weapon system. Modest to the end, Dr. Glim'ara observed. Even now, he refuses to acknowledge his true nature. The debate continued for another hour, with each alien doctor contributing increasingly bizarre theories about human biology. Jake learned that humans were apparently immortal beings who chose to age out of boredom, that they could survive in the vacuum of space for short periods, and that their digestive systems were so efficient they could eat almost anything. That last one's kind of true, Jake admitted. I once ate gas station sushi and lived to tell about it. Gas station sushi? Dr. Wobblethorp quivered with academic interest. What manner of fuel-based cuisine is this? Never mind, Jake said quickly. The point is, I'm fine. I just need food. But his mention of food triggered another round of panic. Apparently, the fact that he wanted to eat while critically injured was either evidence of superhuman metabolism or a sign that his brain was shutting down. I'm going to the cafeteria, Jake announced, standing up from the examination table. Anyone who wants to follow me is welcome to, but I'm getting a sandwich. The medical team exchanged horrified glances. Dr. Glim'ara stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Please, Jake. Moving around in your condition could be fatal. My condition is hungry, Jake replied, but he was already heading for the door. And the only cure for hungry is food. What followed was possibly the strangest parade in galactic history. Jake walked calmly toward the cafeteria, followed by a train of alien medical personnel who were convinced they were witnessing either the bravest or most delusional act in recorded history. In the cafeteria, Jake made himself a turkey sandwich with the kind of casual efficiency that comes from years of practice. The aliens watched in fascination as he added lettuce, tomato, and mustard, apparently treating each action like a sacred ritual. He's eating, Pip'squeek whispered in awe. He's actually eating while bleeding to death. The human capacity for denial is truly remarkable, Dr. Glim'ara observed. He's performing normal life functions despite massive trauma. Jake took a bite of his sandwich and sighed with contentment. This is exactly what I needed. See? Problem solved. But the aliens stared at him in amazement. To them, Jake's ability to eat a sandwich while dying was apparently the most courageous thing they'd ever witnessed. Jake was beginning to understand why humans had such a weird reputation in the galaxy. Jake was halfway through his sandwich when the cafeteria doors burst open and engineer Betty Rodriguez stormed in, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Betty was the kind of person who could fix a warp drive with a paperclip and some creative swearing, and she had absolutely no patience for nonsense. What the hell is going on? She demanded, taking in the scene. I come back from shore leave to find the ship on lockdown, emergency broadcasts going out to 3 star systems, and Jake sitting here eating a sandwich like it's Tuesday. It is Tuesday, Jake pointed out. The human female. Dr. Glim'ara gasped. Perhaps she can provide insight into his condition. Betty looked at Jake, then at the crowd of panicking aliens, then back at Jake. What condition? You look fine. That's what I've been trying to tell them, Jake said, taking another bite of his sandwich. I got a tiny cut on my finger, and they've decided I'm dying. Betty stared at him. Show me. Jake held up his finger, where the microscopic scratch was barely visible. Betty squinted at it, then looked up at the assembled medical team with an expression that could have melted hull plating. "Are you kidding me?" she said, her voice carrying the kind of deadly calm that made smart people run for cover. "You've had the entire ship in panic mode for 6 hours over a scratch that wouldn't even qualify for a children's Band-Aid?" "It's not just a scratch," Dr. Wobblethorp protested. "He lost precious bodily fluids. He could have died." "He lost a drop of blood," Betty said slowly, as if explaining basic physics to a particularly slow child. "Humans lose more blood than that biting their tongues. We lose more blood than that getting paper cuts. We lose more blood than that when we sneeze too hard." The aliens exchanged uncertain glances. Captain Vextar, who had been maintaining his commanding presence throughout the crisis, suddenly looked like he was regretting every decision that had led to this moment. "But Professor Zumblek said," Dr. Blimtalk began. "Professor Zumblek is an idiot," Betty interrupted. "He's never actually met a human. His entire understanding of our species comes from action movies and bad science fiction." "The documentary films," Captain Vextar said weakly. "Are not documentaries," Betty finished. "They're entertainment. Fiction. Make-believe. Humans are not immortal warriors who can survive anything. We're maintenance workers and engineers who occasionally get tiny cuts and then want sandwiches." Jake raised his hand. "Can confirm. Am maintenance worker. Did want sandwich." The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. Dr. Blimtalk's compound eyes were darting between his medical charts and Jake's completely normal appearance. Dr. Wobblethorp had stopped vibrating and was now making what Jake assumed were embarrassed gurgling noises. "So Captain Vextar said carefully, Jake is not dying?" "Jake is not dying," Betty confirmed. "Jake is not injured. Jake is not a superhuman warrior. Jake is a perfectly normal human being who got a perfectly normal tiny cut and wanted a perfectly normal sandwich." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Jake finishing his turkey sandwich and the distant hum of the ship's engines. "This is awkward," Pip'squeek finally said. "This is Tuesday," Jake corrected, "and I'm going back to fix that fan, because it's still rattling and Glim'ara is still going to file noise complaints." He stood up, brushed sandwich crumbs off his shirt, and headed for the door. The aliens watched him go with expressions ranging from embarrassment to confusion to what might have been disappointment. "For what it's worth," Jake said, pausing at the doorway, "thanks for caring. It's nice to know that if I ever actually get hurt, you'll probably overreact appropriately." And with that, he left the cafeteria, leaving behind a room full of very embarrassed aliens and one very annoyed engineer. Betty looked around at the assembled medical team and sighed. Next time, maybe ask the human if he's okay before declaring a galactic emergency. The aliens nodded sheepishly. It seemed like good advice. 3 days later, Jake was back in the ventilation shaft, finally finishing the repair job that had started this whole mess. The fan was no longer rattling, Glim'ara had stopped filing noise complaints, and life aboard the Hypochondriac had returned to something resembling normal. Except for the constant stream of messages flooding the ship's communication system. "Jake," Pip'squeek called over the intercom, "you've got another interview request. The Galactic Health Network wants to do a documentary about the human who ate while dying." Jake sighed and tightened the last bolt. "Tell them I wasn't dying, and I wasn't eating while dying. I was eating while slightly scratched and hungry." "That's not nearly as dramatic," Pip'squeek pointed out. "It's more accurate," Jake replied. But accuracy, it turned out, was less important than legend. Word of Jake's incredible survival story had spread across the galaxy faster than a warp drive malfunction. The story had grown in the telling, of course. By the time it reached the Outer Rim territories, Jake had apparently lost half his blood, performed emergency surgery on himself, and then cooked a 5-course meal while on the verge of death. The Chromaxian Battle Academy had requested permission to study Jake's warrior genetics. The Bloraxian Institute of Medicine wanted to analyze his supernatural healing abilities. And the Squelian Department of Courage had nominated him for their highest honor, the Golden Shriek of Bravery. "This is getting ridiculous," Jake muttered, climbing out of the ventilation shaft. I'm not a warrior. I'm not supernatural. I'm just a guy who knows the difference between a scratch and a sucking chest wound. But the galaxy, it seemed, had decided that Jake Thompson was a legend, whether he liked it or not. Species that had never heard of humans before were suddenly fascinated by these mysterious beings who could casually ignore mortal injuries while thinking about lunch. Captain Vextar found Jake in the corridor, looking slightly embarrassed but trying to maintain his commanding presence. "Jake, I want to apologize again for the overreaction." "It's fine," Jake said. "Honestly, it's kind of nice working with people who care about my well-being, even if they care a little too much." "The thing is," Vextar continued, "we've been getting requests from other ships. They want humans on their crews now. Apparently, having a death-defying warrior on board is considered good luck." Jake stared at him. "You're going to have to explain to them that most humans are not death-defying warriors. Most humans are just people who occasionally get minor injuries and then want food." "I've been trying," Vextar admitted. "But the story has taken on a life of its own. You're famous, Jake. Like it or not." As if to prove his point, the ship's communication system chirped with another incoming message. This one was from the Galactic Broadcasting Corporation, requesting permission to film a day in the life of Jake Thompson, hero of the galaxy. Jake rubbed his temples. "I'm not a hero. I'm a maintenance worker who got a paper cut." "Try telling that to the galaxy," Vextar said. 2 weeks later, Jake was back in another ventilation shaft, working on a stubborn air recycler that had been making weird noises. He'd learned to ignore the constant media attention, the interview requests, and the fan mail from species he'd never heard of. He was so focused on his work that he didn't notice the small piece of metal that had worked loose from the housing. At least not until it scraped across his knuckle, leaving another tiny cut. Jake looked at the microscopic scratch and sighed. Not again. But this time he was ready. He'd learned to carry a small first aid kit with him, complete with band-aids and antiseptic wipes. He cleaned the cut, applied a band-aid, and went back to work. It wasn't until he finished the repair and climbed out of the shaft that he realized the corridor was completely empty. No panicking aliens, no medical emergencies, no ship-wide lockdowns. Jake walked to the bridge, where he found Captain Vextar calmly reviewing duty rosters. "Hey, Cap. How's everything going?" "Fine," Vextar replied without looking up. "Everything's perfectly normal." "Why?" "No reason," Jake said, trying not to smile. "Just checking." He made his way to the cafeteria, where he found the rest of the crew going about their normal routines. Nobody was panicking. Nobody was calling for emergency medical assistance, and nobody was treating him like a dying warrior. Jake made himself a sandwich, sat down at his usual table, and enjoyed his lunch in peaceful, blessed silence. It had taken them a while, but apparently the crew of the Hypochondriac had finally learned the difference between a medical emergency and a minor inconvenience. Of course, 3 systems away, the crew of the starship Anxiety was currently in full panic mode because their human engineer had gotten a splinter. But that was someone else's problem. Jake finished his sandwich, went back to work, and tried not to think about the fact that he was apparently the most famous maintenance worker in the galaxy. Some days he really missed working alone.